Hey team, Jack here. I'm going to give you just a quick background on the adaptive immune system, just a brief introduction, and then we're going to dive into the details in the coming videos into B cells and T cells. Now, this image right here is a very beautiful image. It's immunohistochemistry using fluorescent probes of a lymph node. And a lymph node is one of the key organs in the adaptive immune response. And in the red here, we have a specific fluorescent antibody that binds to a marker on B cells. So we have in the red here, we have B cells. Similarly, in the blue, we have T cells. And in the green, we have a marker for cell division. And what we can see is where the blue cells are co-localized with the red cells. So where there are T cells and B cells together, is where we get the most cell proliferation. We get the most cell division. This is it combined there in such a beautiful image. So in the coming videos, you'll start to understand why this image is the way it is. Why is it that where T cells and B cells are together is where we get the most cell division? But before that, let's just jump into some of the basics. So this is the structure of the immune system. The first thing we've got is barriers that protect us from pathogens, just the first line of defense. And the example is skin. Now, this is boring to an immunologist, so we'll jump on over to the innate immune system. Now, the innate immune system is non-specific. It includes responses such as macrophage responses and neutrophil responses. It attacks the pathogen, but it attacks different pathogens, like different bacterial species in the same way, which is why we call it non-specific. And I think a good analogy is like the army or like the tank, because it uses sort of crude mechanisms to kill the incoming pathogen, but the mechanisms are quite crude that it causes collateral damage. So an example is neutrophils produce bleach, and bleach kills the bacteria or the fungi or the virus, but it also kills our host cells because, you know, our host cells can't handle being exposed to bleach. So the innate immune system is non-specific. Whereas the adaptive immune system is a little bit more like the FBI. It uses sort of an intelligent approach where it learns the weaknesses of the pathogen, and it will develop an attack that will just attack that single pathogen. And then not only that, it will build a memory of the pathogen so we can attack it better the next time. And so that's the adaptive immune system. Now I've drawn these arrows between the two because what we're going to learn as we go through these videos that the delineation between innate and adaptive immune system isn't a firm line. There's a lot of interaction between the two systems, and there's a lot of overlap between the two systems. So let's jump into that anatomy. Some of the main things that we need to point out here in the adaptive immune system is we've got the bone marrow here. In here it's in the iliac bone, but it's a good chunk of your bone marrow is in your femur. And your bone marrow produces all your immune cells, all your circulating leukocytes, including your B cells and your T cells. We also have the spleen, the lymph node, and the tonsils. Now, these are key organs in which the adaptive immune system will be exposed to either the whole pathogen or part of the pathogen as presented by an antigen-presenting cell. Now, previously I talked about how macrophages are antigen-presenting cells. They will eat a pathogen, then expose it to an adaptive immune cell, a T cell. But probably the most professional antigen-presenting cell is the dendritic cell. They're the ones that will sample the pathogen, and then they'll migrate to the lymph node and present the antigen to the T cell in the lymph node. Whereas macrophages tend to stay put, and they might present the antigen to a circulating or infiltrating T cell, or perhaps a memory T cell. But we're going to go into those details later, so don't freak out if that felt like a lot of jargon. This is just a quick overview so we can then start going into the details a bit better. And so the lymph node is all connected up to the lymphatic system. So we talk a lot about the circulatory system. Arteries pump the blood out, it goes through the capillaries to feed oxygen and nutrients to our tissues, and then it comes back via the veins. And then we send that deoxygenated blood out to the lungs again, and then that comes around. Right? So this is the circulatory system. But we actually have a whole nother system called the lymphatic system. And these are a series of tubes, essentially lymphatic vessels throughout our body that essentially take fluid, interstitial fluid, so fluid that's leaked out of the capillaries into the tissue, flows into the lymphatic system. Now, the heart does not pump the lymphatic system. In fact, the key to the lymphatic system's fluid movement are these valves, right? Valves prevent fluid from going in one direction. They can only go in one direction. They can't go back, right? So all the valves in the lymphatics force the fluid in a single direction. So what pumps that fluid? Well, actually the major thing is muscle contraction. So muscle contraction squeeze the lymphatic vessels because the fluid can't go down. It must go up. And so you just need to squeeze and relax and it will fill up with fluid again, and then squeeze and relax. And because of those valves, the fluid can only go up, so away from your toes towards your heart. And this is why I used to live in England, and I used to fly home to New Zealand, and that's about 36 hours of flight time. And that's why my ankles and feet would swell up during that flight time. And that's because that's the lymphatic fluid building up down there. And because I'm not contracting my muscles, I'm not pumping fluid through that lymphatic vessels. Now, attached to the lymphatic vessels are lymph nodes. So this is where pathogens in your interstitial fluid might flow into your lymph and then flow up to the lymph node, where they might get gobbled up by a macrophage in the lymph node, and then the macrophage can then expose the antigens to the T cells in the lymph node. But also dendritic cells can crawl up the lymph nodes, so they can sample a pathogen in the tissue and then crawl up the lymph nodes, the lymphatic vessels to the lymph nodes. Right, so that's the lymphatic system and the lymph nodes. And so that's roughly the anatomy of the innate immune cell. So here we can see this is a beautiful cross-section, immunohistochemistry of a lymph node on the left and a spleen on the right there. And in red, we've got antigen-presenting cells, right? So this is a stain for the antigen-presenting molecule that's present on all professional antigen-presenting cells, and that's MHC2. So in red, we've got a stain for MHC2. In green, we've got a stain for the B cells. And in blue, we've got a stain for the T cells. And so you can see here, you've got these sites in the spleen and in the lymph node of antigen presentation. You've got these cells that, these innate immune cells that have phagocytosed pathogens and are now exposing the antigens to the T cells in those, in these immune organs. We have the T cells here, and you can actually see nicely in the spleen that the T cells are the most in contact with these antigen presenting cells. So the blue is mostly in contact with the red here. And then the T cells, after being exposed to the antigens from the antigen presenting cells, then go on to interact with the B cells and cause B cell proliferation, for example. And so we can see that nicely the structure of the organs is designed in a way that allows the key interactions between these three main cell types of the adaptive immune system and the innate immune system. So where do those cells come from? Well, I mentioned that they all come from the bone marrow. So we get a stem cell inside our bone marrow producing actually a pro-B cell, which then turns into a pre-B cell, which then turns into a B cell. And what that means, and that all happens inside the bone marrow. And so this is handy to remember. B cells are produced and mature all the way to a fully mature grown B cell inside the bone. Right, so B cell bone, it's actually not named after that, it's named after bursa, which is essentially, they originally found them in a chicken butt. They found it in a chicken butt, all right? That's where they originally found those cells, and so it's named after the bursa of the chicken butt. Whereas T cells, they are produced in the bone marrow, but then they migrate out to the thymus where they mature. So that is why they're called T cells. They mature in the thymus, and they're actually named after that. So that's a bit easier, right? And then they might migrate to the lymph node or the spleen, where we saw the fantastic structure of the T cells near the antigen-presenting cells, but also near the B cells, right? Right, yeah, so that's roughly the anatomy of the adaptive immune system. And in the next video, I'm going to tackle B cells. I'm going to jump into some detail there.